The notification came at 6:47 in the morning, while Marcus Webb was eating cereal over his kitchen sink and watching rain streak down the window of his third-floor apartment in Columbus, Ohio. He almost missed it. The Galaxy Match alert tone was the same hollow chime as his weather app, and he'd been half asleep, shoveling spoonfuls of soggy oat clusters into his mouth and thinking about nothing more complex than whether he had enough clean shirts for the week. But when he glanced at his phone and saw the gold banner compatibility match confirmed, Tier 7, he inhaled cereal dust and spent the next 40 seconds coughing hard enough to slap the counter. Tier 7. He stood in his kitchen for a long time, water dripping from the spoon onto the linoleum. Every human being on Earth with a Galaxy Match profile was eligible. That was the deal the Galactic Cooperative had offered 6 years ago when First Contact was officially formalized. Interspecies matching for those who consented, a voluntary program, entirely optional, designed to foster what the Cooperative's diplomats called meaningful cross-cultural bonds. Most people signed up as a joke. Marcus had signed up at his friend Devon's bachelor party, 3 beers deep, because Devon had dared him and because everyone else at the table already had their matches confirmed. All normal tier, meaning a human partner pulled from some distant colony, or at most a Valurian, who were basically human with slightly wider eyes and a fondness for fermented grain that made them popular at parties. Tier 7 meant non-humanoid. Tier 7 meant alien, in the full and uncompromising sense of the word. He opened the app with a thumb that was not entirely steady. Her profile loaded slowly, image first. He tried to find a word that wasn't inadequate, extraordinary. Not beautiful in any human sense, though there was something in the arrangement of her features that pulled the eye and refused to let go. Her skin was a deep iridescent copper that shifted toward violet in its shadows, like the inside of an abalone shell. She had 4 arms, the upper pair longer and more muscular. The lower pair folded close to her torso in what the app's cultural note tagged as a posture of formal presentation. Her eyes were amber with a vertical pupil, and they were looking directly at the camera with an expression he couldn't read at all, not hostility, not warmth, just an absolute and total certainty, the way a mountain looks certain. Below the image her name, Vraxen Sol Kareth. And below that, in smaller text that hit him harder than the Tier 7 had, Princess Designate, House Kareth, sovereign domain of the Vreth Expanse. He put the phone face down on the counter. He picked it up again. He read the line 3 more times. Princess. Marcus Webb, 29 years old, junior logistics coordinator at a shipping firm that mostly handled agricultural equipment, apartment that smelled like instant noodles and old sneakers, who had never in his life been matched with anything more interesting than a slightly above-average Hinge profile. Marcus Webb had been matched with an alien princess. He called Devon. Mate, Devon said before Marcus could speak. I already saw. Linda showed me. It's all over the Galaxy Match forums. Why is it on the forums? Because a Vreth royal match hasn't happened in 40 years. The last human to match Vreth royalty was some diplomat's daughter in Geneva, and she turned it down. A pause. You're not turning it down. I didn't say. Marcus, you are not turning this down. He looked at the rain on the window. He thought about his clean shirt situation. I don't even know what a Vreth is, he said. Devon sent him 6 links in the next 30 seconds. The Vreth were old. That was the first thing you learned about them, and the thing that everything else grew from. They had been spacefaring for 11,000 years before humans figured out fire, had built and abandoned empires the way other civilizations built and abandoned shopping malls. The Vreth Expanse was not a kingdom or a nation in any sense that mapped cleanly to human politics. It was more like a philosophy that had accumulated territory, a set of deeply held convictions about order, hierarchy, and the sacred geometry of power that had calcified over millennia into something that looked, from the outside, almost religious. House Kareth was one of the Expanse's 7 ruling houses. It governed 3 star systems and a significant chunk of what the Cooperative's navigation charts called the Relan Corridor. The current head of House Kareth was Lord Sovereign Dreveth Sol Kareth, who was 412 years old, had personally overseen 2 territorial expansions, and had a reputation among cooperative diplomats as someone you did not want to disagree with on matters of protocol. He had one daughter, Vraxen, 22 years old by Vreth reckoning, which translated to roughly 30 in human equivalent, the princess designate, the heir. And she was, by every account Marcus could find in the forums, and the 3 news articles that had published in the 5 hours since his match went public, the most comprehensively ungovernable member of House Kareth in living memory. He read through the forum posts with the increasingly helpless feeling of a man watching a boulder roll toward him from a very long distance. She had rejected 47 previous compatibility matches, not because she was difficult to match. The Galacti match algorithm, which ran on processing power that made Earth's entire digital infrastructure look like a pocket calculator, apparently considered her highly compatible with a range of species. She rejected them because she found the candidates boring. One cooperative ambassador's son she had apparently dismissed after 11 minutes, with the single observation that he folded his hands the same way twice. A Valurian senior diplomat she'd rejected in the lobby of the matching facility before the formal introduction ceremony had even begun. The 47th, a warrior of the Geln species who was 7 feet tall and had a collection of battle commendations that occupied an entire wall, she had matched with enthusiastically for 3 days before vanishing from the facility entirely and reappearing 6 weeks later on a salvage freighter operating in the outer Relan corridor, allegedly having spent the intervening time helping the crew strip the hull of a derelict cooperative warship for parts. Her father had been furious. She had been by all accounts entirely unbothered. "She's wild," Devon said when Marcus called him back. "Like, not metaphorically wild. She literally went feral on a junk ship. The forum post says she helped repair their drive coil. She has an engineering degree. She has 6 degrees. She also once arm-wrestled a Keth cargo handler and won." A pause. "You're really not turning this down?" "I haven't decided anything." "Marcus." Devon's voice went quieter, more serious, the voice he used when he'd stopped being funny and started being honest. "When you were 12, you told me your biggest fear was being ordinary. You said you were scared you were going to live your whole life and nothing interesting was ever going to happen to you. You remember that?" Marcus looked at his phone, at the image of Vraxin Sol Kareth looking at the camera with those mountain-certain eyes. "I was 12, he said. "I was dramatic." "You still say it. You said it at my bachelor party. You said it's why you signed up." He had said that. He had said it because it was true. He accepted the match at 8:15 a.m. By 8:30, his phone had rung 4 times. 2 journalists, the Galacti Match liaison office, and a very polite cooperative diplomat named Eshin Ray, who explained, in the gentle tone of someone diffusing a complicated device, that the formal introduction ceremony was scheduled for 12 days from now, that Marcus would need to attend a 3-day cultural orientation prior, that there were certain protocols regarding Vreth royalty that were non-negotiable, and that Marcus was, broadly speaking, in for a genuinely unusual experience. "Is she going to like me?" Marcus asked. Eshin Ray was quiet for a moment. "The princess," he said carefully, "has very specific responses to people. I would not say she dislikes anyone. I would say she has a considerable gift for identifying exactly who a person is very quickly and responding to that with absolute honesty." "That doesn't answer my question." "No," Eshin Ray agreed pleasantly. "It doesn't. I'll send you the orientation schedule." The cultural orientation happened at a cooperative facility outside of Reykjavik, neutral ground. The liaison explained, chosen because Iceland had the lowest density of people who would recognize Marcus on the street, which was both flattering and slightly concerning. He spent 3 days in a low building that smelled like recycled air and anxiety, being briefed by a rotating cast of specialists on Vreth customs, etiquette, hierarchy, and the 17 different ways a human could cause a catastrophic diplomatic incident without meaning to. Most of it was delivered by an AI counselor that the facility called Uncle, Universal Navigator for Cross-Species Liaison Education, which spoke in a slow, deliberate cadence that managed to sound simultaneously wise and exhausted, like a very old man who had explained the same things to thousands of people, and had long since stopped finding it amusing. "The Vreth do not shake hands," Uncle told him on the first morning, displaying a holographic diagram of formal greeting postures. "The lower arms are never offered first in a formal greeting. The upper arms indicate martial standing. Offering the upper arms to someone of higher rank is either a challenge or a profound compliment, depending on context, and the line between them is thinner than you would like." "How do I know which one I'm doing?" "You will frequently not know. The princess will know. This is generally the more important factor." "That's not reassuring." It was not intended to be reassuring. It was intended to be accurate. Uncle's display shifted to a chart of social hierarchies. The Vreth concept of wildness, which you will encounter applied to the princess, does not translate to the human concept of unpredictability. A wild Vreth is one who exists outside the accepted patterns of behavior without losing coherence. They do not become random. They become something for which no pattern exists. This is considered either a profound spiritual condition or a serious personality disorder, depending on which house you ask. "Which does her father think it is?" A pause. "Lord Sovereign Dreveth Solkareth," Uncle said, "has not issued a formal position on this question in 11 years. Informally, his household staff report that he has stopped trying to answer it." On the second day, Marcus asked Uncle why the algorithm had matched him specifically. "The Galacty Match Compatibility Index," Uncle said, "does not reveal its methodology." "Give me a guess." Another pause, longer this time. "If I were to speculate, and I am not authorized to do so, I would suggest that the algorithm does not match on similarity. It matches on resonance. Two systems that vibrate at the same frequency are not necessarily identical. They are complementary." The display went dark. "I have said more than I should. Please review the section on Vreth ceremonial dining." On the third day, the night before the ceremony, Marcus sat in his small orientation room and looked at Vraxen's profile photo again. Not because he was nervous, exactly. More because he had a feeling, the kind that sits in your chest and hums without giving you words, that everything that came after this was going to be irreversible, and he wanted to be clear-eyed about that before he walked through the door. She was still looking at the camera with the same certainty. He thought, "I am either about to have the most interesting experience of my life, or I am going to cause a diplomatic incident. Possibly both." He put his phone away and went to sleep. The formal introduction ceremony was held in a cooperative meeting hall in Reykjavik's diplomatic quarter, a building that looked modest from the outside, and revealed, on the inside, an architecture that made you feel you'd accidentally stepped into the edge of a star. The Vreth delegation had arrived the previous evening. Marcus had been briefed extensively on what to expect, and had felt, during that briefing, that he understood what he was walking into. He had been wrong. He knew he was wrong the moment he entered the main hall, and she was already standing in the center of it, not at the designated greeting position, not flanked by her escort as the protocol specified, but alone in the middle of the floor with her arms, all 4 of them, folded in a configuration the briefing materials hadn't included, examining a structural joint in the ceiling, with the focused attention of someone who has found something genuinely interesting in an otherwise tedious afternoon. She didn't look at him when he entered. The Vreth escort, standing in rigid formation along the wall, looked deeply uncomfortable. The cooperative liaison staff looked at Marcus with the expression of people who were very glad they weren't him. He walked across the hall. His footsteps were loud on the polished floor. He stopped beside her and looked up at the ceiling joint she was studying. There was nothing obviously remarkable about it, a standard tension support, standard materials, competent craftsmanship. "It's off-center," he said after a moment. "About 4 millimeters. The load distribution would be slightly asymmetric. Not enough to matter, but you can see the stress patterns in the finish if the light hits right." She looked at him then. Up close, her eyes were more complex than the photograph had suggested. The amber was layered, bands of color inside color, and the vertical pupil contracted slightly as she focused on him. She was taller than he'd expected, the upper set of shoulders level with his eyeline, and she had a quality of absolute stillness that felt less like calm and more like a compressed spring. "Logistics," she said. Her voice had a harmonic undertone that the briefing materials had mentioned but not adequately described, like two notes played at once, one human frequency and one just slightly below it, so that her words arrived with a kind of physical weight. "You coordinate the movement of agricultural machinery." "Mostly," he said. "I also spend a lot of time staring at things to figure out why they're not working the way they should." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, the Vreth smiled differently, the lower set of muscles, a slight widening around the eyes but an adjustment, a recalibration. "My father's people," she said, "have spent the last 14 months preparing 17 candidates for this match. All of them were very impressive. I read about some of them. The Geln warrior folded his hands the same way 3 times in 6 minutes, she said. Pattern repetition under mild social stress. It tells you how someone will respond to genuine pressure." She looked back at the ceiling joint. "You looked at the ceiling instead of at me." "I was following your eyeline. My last 47 matches all looked at me." "That seems exhausting." She was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly, the harmonic undertone dropping to something lower, almost private. "It is." The formal dinner that followed was, by the standards Marcus had been briefed to expect, a restrained diplomatic catastrophe. He used the wrong eating implement for the third course, referred to a senior Vreth house attendant by their informal, addressed 3 exchanges before it was appropriate, and knocked over a ceremonial water vessel that turned out to be the kind of thing you weren't supposed to knock over. Each mistake produced a tiny seismic tremor in the delegation's careful composure. Vraxen watched each incident with an expression that he was starting to learn, was her version of amused. "You are not performing," she said, when the vessel crisis had been diplomatically resolved and they had a moment of relative privacy. "I genuinely can't figure out which fork to use," he said. "There are 7 forks." "There are 11. You are using the 7th for its intended purpose, which is statistically unlikely given that most match candidates receive the full protocol briefing and still default to the ceremonial first fork out of anxiety. I picked it because the handle felt balanced." "Yes," she studied him with the same attention she'd given the ceiling joint. "You make decisions by the weight of the thing in your hand. I make decisions by whether something feels right." "The Vreth word for that," she said, "is Vrathsal. It means the knowing that lives in the hands. We consider it a navigational instinct. Most species lose it when they build enough cities." She picked up her own utensil, the ceremonial first fork, he noticed, and held it without using it. "My father thinks I am broken because I cannot function within patterns. I think patterns are how things die slowly." "What does Uncle think?" She looked at him sharply. "You've spoken with Uncle." 3 days of orientation. Marcus considered the word thorough. Uncle has been the cooperative's diplomatic counselor for 112 years, she said. He has watched more match ceremonies than any other entity in the known expanse. He told my father's household 3 months ago that my next match would be unprecedented and that the house should prepare for significant adjustment to its expectations. She set down the fork. He did not specify how. He told me that the algorithm matches on resonance, Marcus said, not similarity. She was very still for a moment. He told you that. Her harmonic undertone shifted, something he was starting to read as the Vreth equivalent of surprise. He said he was probably saying more than he should. She looked at him for a long time with those layered amber eyes, the vertical pupil fully widened now in a way the briefing materials had associated with high engagement. The rest of the hall moved around them, the careful diplomacy of dinner, the small performances of hierarchy and grace, and neither of them was paying attention to any of it. There is a protocol, she said finally, for the next phase of the match process. My father's household has prepared a formal immersion itinerary, 14 days in the expanse, cultural integration visits, diplomatic presentations, a meeting with Lord Sovereign Drevath. She paused. It is entirely structured. It sounds thorough, Marcus said. It sounds, she said, like 47 previous matches slightly rearranged. She picked up the fork again, balanced it on one finger, watched it tilt. I told my father's household 3 days ago that I would not be following the protocol itinerary. What are you doing instead? She set the fork down, balanced perfectly on its edge this time. I am going to the Relan corridor. There is a decommissioned cooperative relay station in the outer expanse that my house's engineering division has been trying to restore for 6 years. The relay matrix is non-standard. It was built during the expansion period using 2 incompatible drive frameworks overlaid without proper integration protocols. Every team they have sent has failed to resolve the incompatibility. She looked at him levelly. I want to see how you would approach it. I work with agricultural machinery, he said. You work with systems that don't function the way they should, she said, and you make decisions by whether something feels right. She waited. Are you coming? Marcus thought about Eshin Ray and his careful diplomatic voice. He thought about the 17-point protocol itinerary. He thought about what Devon had said about ordinary lives. Will your father try to stop us? Undoubtedly. Will he succeed? She considered this with genuine seriousness. The transport I have arranged departs in 40 minutes, she said. If we leave now, before the dessert course, the diplomatic delay protocols for formal interspecies match visits require a minimum of 6 hours before any House representative can invoke retrieval authority. She paused. We will be in hyperspace before that. That's an extremely precise answer, he said. I have been planning this for 3 weeks. He looked at her. He looked at the 7-11 forks arranged before him. He looked at the room full of careful people performing careful diplomacy, and at the fork balanced on its edge, tilted just barely wrong, like a building 4 millimeters off-center. He pushed back his chair. I should mention, he said, as they moved toward the service corridor, she was already orienting toward with the certainty of someone who had memorized the building schematics, that I have never been in hyperspace before. I know. And I've never worked on alien relay infrastructure. I know that too. Is there anything about this situation, he said, as they pushed through the service door into a corridor that smelled like carbon-filtered air and engine lubricant, that you don't know? She paused, turned, looked at him with the mountain certainty. What you will do, she said, when things go wrong. What Marcus had not understood about the Vreth expanse, until he was inside it was that it was not a place in any sense that mapped to his experience of space. Earth's concept of the cosmos was vast and mostly empty, punctuated by rare islands of matter. The expanse was dense, not with stars, though there were plenty of those, but with history. Every system they passed through had names that went back millennia, associations and meanings layered over each other like geological strata. The hyperspace corridor they traveled felt less like crossing empty distance and more like moving through a library. Vraxin spent the transit briefing him with a thoroughness that Uncle would have recognized and possibly approved of. She had, he discovered, a gift for explanation that stripped things down to their functional core and then reassembled them from there. She didn't beautify or simplify, she clarified. She explained the relay station's history, the expansion period engineering philosophy, why two incompatible drive frameworks had been overlaid in the first place. A decision made under time pressure by a house engineer who had been right about the urgency and wrong about the solution, and what every previous repair team had tried. He listened and asked questions when he didn't understand, and watched her answer them with the same focused attention she gave structural ceiling joints and ceremonial forks. "You enjoy this," he said, during a break in the briefing when she'd leaned back in her seat and was looking at the transit display with something that was close to peace. "Explaining things." "I enjoy things that are complicated," she said. "Most people find complicated things exhausting. They want to be given the answer." She watched the numbers on the display. "My father wants to be given the answer." "What does he think the answer is?" "That I need structure and appropriate guidance and a partner who understands the weight of what House Kareth represents." She said it without bitterness, just accurately, the way you state facts about the weather. "He is not wrong about the weight. He is wrong about what I need to carry it." "What do you need?" She was quiet for a moment. "Someone who looks at things that aren't working and doesn't already know the answer," she said. "Someone for whom the problem is still genuinely a problem." They came out of hyperspace 6 hours later, and the relay station was below them, and it was not what Marcus had expected. He had expected something derelict. What the station was vast. It occupied the L4 point of a binary system, suspended between the gravitational pulls of two medium stars, with the casual permanence of something that had been there long enough to become a feature of the system rather than an addition to it. From the approach, it looked like a coral reef in space. Accretion and attachment and repair and growth layered over centuries, until the original structure was barely visible beneath what had happened to it. "The original relay matrix is in the central tower," Vraxin said, pointing to a section of the station that gleamed slightly less than the rest, which meant it was probably only 300 years old. The two incompatible frameworks intersect at the base of the tower. The previous teams all tried to interface them directly. What happened? Cascade resonance failure. The two systems recognize each other as incompatible and generate reciprocal interference patterns that amplify until they overload the matrix. She watched his face. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about combined harvesters," he said. She turned to look at him fully. "There's a specific failure mode in dual-axis combined harvesters," he said. "Two drive systems running in parallel, both incompatible, both optimized for different load conditions. When you try to integrate them, they fight each other and burn out. But there's a workaround that some of the older operators figured out. You don't integrate them. You desync them deliberately. You introduce a controlled phase offset so they're never running in direct opposition. They still can't communicate, but they stop fighting." Vraxin was very still. "That is," she said carefully, "not in any engineering literature I have encountered in 6 years of working on the station." "It's oral tradition from operators in Kansas," he said. "My firm handles equipment logistics for 3 combine manufacturers. I spend a lot of time listening to old guys explain why things that aren't supposed to work do." She looked at him for a long time. "Show me," she said. It took 11 days. Not 11 days of continuous struggle. More like 11 days of the specific rhythm that hard problems create when you stay with them, where difficulty and small victory and reversal and incremental progress accumulate into something that's less like solving a puzzle and more like having a long conversation with a system that doesn't want to talk to you. The station had a crew of 3. A Vreth maintenance technician named Sova who had been stationed here for 2 years and had developed the resigned competence of someone who has been left alone with an intractable problem long enough to stop expecting to solve it. A cooperative contracted systems analyst named Priya Osai from Accra who was on her second tour of Expanse postings and kept a running log of every alien phrase she'd learned on her tablet cover. And a cargo management unit the size of a large dog that had no name, but responded to a clicking sound Priya made with her tongue. Sova received the news that Princess-designate Vraxan had arrived with a match candidate to attempt the relay matrix with the expression of someone who had been told it would rain for the 3rd consecutive season. Not disbelief, just the tired recognition that the universe was once again going to make things complicated in ways that he had no framework for. He showed Marcus the previous team's work. There were logs going back 6 years, detailed, thorough, complete records of every attempt and every failure. Marcus read through them not as a technician reading documentation, but as someone reading a story about a conversation that kept going wrong, trying to identify the moment the disagreement began. They all started from the same assumption, he said to Priya on the second evening, while Vraxan and Sova were reviewing the matrix schematics in the central tower. They assumed the 2 frameworks needed to understand each other. Priya looked up from her tablet. Don't they? When I was 19, I worked a summer on my uncle's farm in Indiana. He had 2 tractors from different manufacturers that he ran in tandem for the big harvests. They couldn't be networked, completely different systems. He never tried to make them communicate. He just made sure they were never in each other's way at the same time. Marcus turned a page in the log. The engineer who built this station was trying to make 2 systems communicate that weren't designed to. Every team after him kept trying to finish that conversation. And you want to make them not be in each other's way. I want to make them operate in the same space without fighting over it. Priya looked at him for a moment. I'm going to write that down, she said. That's the most practically useful thing anyone has said about this station in 2 years. She wrote it down. On the 3rd day, Sova, who had said almost nothing to Marcus directly, came to find him in the station's small workshop, where Marcus had been spending his non-briefing hours pulling apart a secondary relay component that wasn't related to the main problem, just trying to understand how Vreth engineering thought. You are not an engineer, Sova said, not accusatorially, just establishing. No, Marcus said. I coordinate the movement of heavy machinery. I'm good at understanding why things that are supposed to work aren't and working around the reason. Sova was quiet for a moment watching Marcus examine the component. The princess has rejected 47 matches, he said. I was on station when the 43rd arrived. A Valurian materials scientist, very qualified. He paused. The princess spent 4 hours reviewing the relay matrix logs with him. Then she thanked him formally and returned to her family transport. What did she say to him? She said he knew everything the previous teams had known. Sova picked up a calibration tool from the workbench, turned it over, set it down. I have been on this station for 2 years. I have watched 17 engineers try to solve the relay matrix. The ones who failed always knew exactly what they were doing. He looked at Marcus steadily. You do not know exactly what you are doing. Is that a compliment? In Vreth engineering culture, Sova said carefully, there is a concept called Thalveth. It means approximately the ignorance that sees clearly. It is considered a gift and a difficulty simultaneously. Those who have it cannot be easily trained because training fills in the ignorance. But the things they solve, he stopped. The princess has Thalveth. She has never been able to apply it to this station because she knows too much about it now. 6 years of knowledge. She needs someone who doesn't know anything. She needs someone whose ignorance is the specific shape of this problem solution. Sova picked up the calibration tool again, pressed it into Marcus's palm. "This is yours. You will need it." It was a small tool, lighter than it looked, with a balance point slightly forward of center. When Marcus pressed his thumb to it, it sat exactly right in his hand. He used it for the rest of the 11 days. He was using it when the answer came to him. On the 5th day, they received the second message from Lord Sovereign Drevath. It was longer than the first, more formal, and Uncle read it to them through the relay connection with the careful neutrality of a translator who understood that what was being said and what was being meant were not entirely the same thing. "He says," Uncle explained, "that House Kareth is monitoring the situation. He says that the formal immersion itinerary remains available if the current work concludes without success. He says," a pause, "that he hopes the match candidate is finding the expanse instructive." "He wants to know if I'm overwhelmed," Marcus said. "He wants to know," Uncle said, "if you understand what you have walked into. Tell him I'm working on it. I will convey that in appropriately formal vreth." Another pause. "He will interpret working on it as either commendable persistence or a polite admission of defeat, depending on his mood." "Which is his mood likely to be?" "He is 412 years old, and his daughter has departed formal protocol for a relay station in the Relan corridor with a man from Ohio. His mood is complex." Vraxane, who had been listening, made the small sound that was her laugh. She made it again on the 6th evening, when Marcus tried to prepare a meal using the station's galley, and produce something that was edible but which Sova examined with the focused concern of a doctor reviewing an unusual test result. The cargo management unit clicked twice and retreated under a console. Priya ate it with the specific diplomatic neutrality of someone who had eaten a great many alien foods and had developed a policy of not expressing opinions. "It's from a recipe on the packet," Marcus said, defensive. "You followed the instructions," Vraxane said, examining her portion with genuine curiosity. "I followed the vreth instructions. The measurements weren't intuitive to me, so I improvised." "Improvised how?" "I doubled the second ingredient because the quantity seemed too small, and then added the third ingredient earlier than specified because the mixture looked wrong." She looked at the food, she looked at him. "You applied Thalveth to a recipe. Is that bad?" She took a bite, considered. "It is not what it was intended to be," she said. "It is in its own way functional." She took another bite. "Sova, you can eat it. It will not harm you." Sova ate it with the expression of a man who was reassessing his assumptions in real time. That evening, after Sova and Priya had gone to their quarters, and the station was quiet in the deep specific way that space stations are quiet. The hum of systems, the distant tick of thermal expansion in metal, the absence of wind. Marcus and Vraxane sat in the observation bay, which had a long curved viewport looking out at the binary stars and the deep field beyond them. "Do you miss Earth?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "I miss Devon," he said. "I miss the specific smell of Columbus in September. I don't miss the commute." He looked at the stars. "The honest answer is that I've spent my whole life slightly outside of where I was. Not unhappily, I like my life. But I've always had this feeling that the interesting part was somewhere else, and I just needed to figure out which direction to walk. And now," he looked at her, at the copper-violet iridescence of her skin in the starlight, at the forearms folded in rest, at the amber eyes watching him with the same focused attention she gave to engineering problems and sealing joints and forks. "Now I'm in the right direction," he said. She was quiet for a while. The binary stars turned in the viewport. "The 47th match," she said eventually. "The Geln warrior. He was extraordinary by every measure I have encountered, decorated, intelligent. He had a quality of presence that even I found compelling." "Why did you leave?" "Because on the 3rd day he told me that he understood me." She paused. He said it as a gift. He meant it as a gift. He had studied everything available about my history, my behaviors, my patterns, and he had constructed a model of who I was, and he presented it to me as evidence of his suitability. Her lower arm notation started moving, not at full speed, slower, reflective. He was not wrong about the facts. He had assembled them correctly. But the model was, she stopped. It was a pattern, Marcus said. It was a very good pattern. She looked at him. You have never told me you understand me. I don't understand you, he said. I'm learning you. There's a difference. Her lower left third finger folded. Yes, she said, there is. Marcus had never worked with alien engineering before. The components of the relay matrix were built to tolerances and specifications that made his experience essentially useless as a technical foundation. What he had was the principle, the understanding that two incompatible systems could coexist if you introduced the right offset, and what Vraxin had was everything else. The materials knowledge, the systems integration theory, the 6 years of failed attempts, and what they'd taught her about where the incompatibility lived. What they did mostly was talk. He would describe a phenomenon he'd observed in industrial equipment. She would translate it into the theoretical framework of expansion period engineering. He would push back on where the translation seemed off, where the behavior he'd seen in real systems didn't match the theory's predictions. She would adjust, revise, sometimes discard entirely and start from a different angle. Her lower arms worked constantly while she thought, not nervously, but expressively, the fingers moving in what he slowly realized were not random fidgeting, but compressed notation, a physical shorthand that Vreth engineers apparently used to track multiple variables simultaneously. He started recognizing individual gestures. There was one she used when she'd found something wrong with her own reasoning, a quick fold of the third finger of the lower left hand, and he learned to watch for it, because it usually meant they were about to make progress. On the 4th day, she caught him watching her hands. It's how you think, he said before she could comment. Physically, your hands are part of the calculation. She looked at him with the layered amber eyes. Most people find it distracting. I find it useful. I can tell when you've spotted an error about 4 minutes before you say it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, my father's household staff have requested 3 times that I stop doing it in formal settings. They say it gives information to observers. That seems like a feature, Marcus said. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said, it does. On the 7th day, they had the phase offset calibrated in theory. On the 8th and 9th days, they tested it in simulation, and it failed twice, not catastrophically, but wrongly in ways that told them the offset needed refinement. On the 10th day, Marcus was eating something that passed for food in the station's galley, and staring at his tablet when the answer came to him, not as an intellectual breakthrough, but as a physical sensation. The way the right wrench feels right before you've consciously identified it as right. He went to find Vraxin. She was in the central tower, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the relay interface panel, her lower arms moving rapidly through notation sequences. She looked up when he came in. The offset isn't static, he said. That's why the simulations keep failing. We've been calibrating it as a fixed value, but the two systems drift against each other over time. It needs to be dynamic. It needs to adjust continuously to maintain the offset as the systems cycle. She stared at him. That would require, she said slowly, a feedback loop external to both systems, something that reads the phase difference and adjusts the offset in real time. Is that possible with what we have? Her lower arms stopped moving. She looked at the panel. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, the specific expression he'd come to associate with a conclusion she hadn't wanted to reach, because it made her revise something she'd believed firmly. The relay matrix's own diagnostic system, she said. It runs continuously. It reads both frameworks independently because it was designed to interface with each separately. If we reroute its output to a phase correction node, it becomes the external feedback loop, he said. We would be using the station's failure detection system, she said carefully, to actively manage the failure it was built to detect. Yes. She looked at the panel for a long time. That, she said, is the most inelegant solution I have ever heard. Does it work? Her lower left third finger folded. Yes, she said. It works. The relay matrix came online on the morning of the 11th day, and the light that came out of it when it activated was the wrong color, a deep gold green that neither of them had expected, a product of the two incompatible frameworks finally operating in productive relationship rather than mutual suppression. The station's diagnostic system flagged it as an anomaly. Vraxin overrode the flag. The light stabilized. They stood in the central tower and watched the relay sing. My father's engineers, Vraxin said, after a while, will tell him that the solution was theoretically foreseeable. They'll probably also say it was inefficient. The diagnostic rerouting uses 12% more power than a direct integration would have. If you could do a direct integration. If we could do a direct integration, she watched the light, 12% is acceptable. He was quiet for a moment. Are you going to tell him about the combines? She turned to look at him, and something in her expression was different from anything he'd seen before. Not the mountain certainty, not the focused intensity, not even the quiet private shift he'd seen at the dinner table. Something more open, more direct, like a door she didn't usually open. I am going to tell him, she said, that the solution required understanding how systems that cannot communicate can still coexist. She paused. I think he will understand what that means. Is that a metaphor about us? It is several metaphors simultaneously, she said. The breath tend toward compression. He laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed in 11 days, not from unhappiness, but because there hadn't been space for it. The problem had occupied everything. The sound of it seemed to surprise her. My 47 previous matches, she said, watching him with those layered eyes. None of them laughed in my presence without performing it first. I wasn't performing. I know, she turned back to the relay light. That is the first thing I knew about you. The morning after the relay came online, Sova found them both in the central tower again, not working this time, just standing near the interface panel, watching the gold-green light. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, in Vreth, something that Vraxin translated for Marcus quietly. He said, the station has been waiting 6 years for someone to stop trying to fix it and start trying to understand it. She paused. He also said you may keep the calibration tool. Sova left. Priya appeared in the doorway shortly after, tablet in hand. I've been documenting the solution, she said. Phase offset desynchronization with dynamic feedback correction through rerouted diagnostic systems. She looked at Marcus. Can I ask where the diagnostic rerouting idea specifically came from? The initial offset principle I understand, but using the station's own failure detection as the corrective mechanism is. I want to make sure I have the origin right. I was eating and staring at my tablet, Marcus said, and I thought about how the diagnostic system was the only part of the station that had been reading both frameworks accurately for 6 years without being pulled apart by them. It was the one neutral party. It seemed like it should be doing something useful with that position. Priya wrote this down. The cooperative's technical review board, she said carefully, is going to have a very interesting conversation about whether this solution can be replicated at the 3 other incompatible framework stations in the expanse. How many other incompatible framework stations are there? In the Relan corridor alone, 7. Marcus looked at Vraxin. She was watching him with the mountain-certain eyes. I should have negotiated a consulting rate, he said. You would need to be a registered cooperative contractor for that, Vraxin said. The registration process takes 6 weeks and requires 3 letters of reference from existing members. Do you know any existing members? My father, she said, is the Lord Sovereign of a house that controls 3-star systems. He knows several hundred registered cooperative contractors. He's probably not going to write me a reference letter. He will, she said quietly, when he understands what you've done here. She was right. The 4th message came the morning they prepared to leave the station, and Uncle read it to them with something that sounded, for the first time, like warmth. Lord Sovereign Dreveth Solkareth sends his acknowledgement, Uncle said, of the successful restoration of the relay station. He notes that the solution employed a principle he had not previously encountered in Vreth engineering literature, and that he looks forward to a formal briefing on its application. A pause. He also says, Uncle's voice shifted slightly, the deliberate pace slowing further, that House Kareth has not seen a match of genuine resonance in 40 years. He says this as a statement of record. Another pause. He does not say more than that, but I have known Lord Sovereign Drevath for 60 years. That is more than he has said about any previous candidate. Priya behind Marcus stopped typing. Sova, who was running departure checks, stilled for a moment before continuing. Vraxin looked at the relay light for a long time before she spoke. He will still want the formal meeting, she said. He will want the protocol and the ceremony and the full weight of House Kareth present. I know, Marcus said. He will ask you questions that sound like tests, but are actually him deciding whether to trust you. I know that too. She looked at him. You're not afraid of him. I'm appropriately respectful of him, Marcus said. He's 400 years old and he runs 3-star systems. That earns respect. But he loves you. That means we're on the same side. She was very still for a moment. Not the compressed spring stillness of her baseline, but something softer, as if something had shifted in her internal architecture and was still finding its new position. My 47 previous candidates, she said, treated my father as an obstacle. He's not an obstacle. He's a variable. You sound like Uncle. Uncle's been giving me good material. Her lower left third finger folded twice in quick succession, something he hadn't seen before. He filed it away to ask Uncle about later. It felt important. The transit back from the station took 8 hours. They sat in the same positions as before, this time in comfortable silence, watching the stars move. At some point Vraxin fell asleep. Vreth sleep differently than humans, sitting upright, eyes not fully closed, in a state that looked from the outside like meditation. And Marcus sat very still beside her and thought about his apartment in Columbus, about the rain on the window, about the cereal he'd been eating at 6:47 a.m. when the gold banner came up on his phone. He thought about what he'd have missed if he'd been slightly more sensible, if he'd already been awake enough to talk himself out of it, if he'd put the phone down and gone about his day. He was a logistics coordinator from Columbus, Ohio. He had solved a 6-year engineering problem with a principal from Kansas Combine Operators. He was engaged to a Vreth princess who had rejected 47 candidates and once gone feral on a junk freighter, and who expressed her reasoning with the fingers of her lower left hand. Her father was 412 years old and ran 3-star systems and was going to have opinions. He was the least obviously qualified person for any of this. He looked at the stars and thought, good. Lord Sovereign Dreveth Solkareth sent 4 messages over the 11 days, each one slightly shorter and more compressed than the last, which Uncle reached via relay connection, explained was a Vreth indicator of a superior processing a significant recalibration. The 4th message consisted of a single formal phrase that Uncle translated as, House Kareth acknowledges the work of the match pair and awaits their return. He's furious, Marcus said. He is adjusting, Uncle said through the relay. There is a distinction. Lord Sovereign Drevath has lived for 412 years. He has learned that the things he cannot contain are frequently the things he most needs to understand. Did you plan this? Marcus asked. You and the algorithm. A pause. The Galacty Match Compatibility Index, Uncle said, does not reveal its methodology. Uncle. Another pause, longer. The match between Princess-designate Vraxin and yourself was not an accident, Uncle said carefully. A person who makes decisions by the weight of things in their hands, who spends their working life understanding why systems that shouldn't work do, who is sufficiently unintimidated by the unfamiliar to look at a ceiling joint rather than a princess, that is not a common profile. He paused again. I made a recommendation. The algorithm confirmed it. You made a recommendation to an algorithm. I have been doing this for 112 years, Uncle said. I have earned certain operating privileges. Vraxin, who had been listening, made a small sound that was her version of a laugh. It was the second real sound of amusement Marcus had heard from her, and it was better than the relay light. They returned to the cooperative facility for the formal meeting with Drevath Sol Karath, because some things required proper architecture even when you'd already decided they were going to happen. The Lord Sovereign was not what Marcus had expected. He had expected someone whose 400 years of authority had calcified into something cold. What Drevath Sol Karath was tired, not weakly, not in defeat, but in the way that very long experience makes people tired of performance while keeping them deeply invested in substance. He received them in the facility's formal hall. He looked at Marcus for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at his daughter. You solved the relay station, he said. Marcus solved the relay station, Vraxin said. I provided the theoretical framework. He provided the principle. A principle from agricultural machinery. From the people who operate agricultural machinery, Marcus said. There's a difference. Drevath looked at him with the same layered amber eyes as his daughter, though where hers had compressed certainty, his had the specific quality of someone who has been surprised by the world enough times to have developed a measured appreciation for it. My daughter, he said, has rejected 47 candidates. Some of them were extraordinary, by any measure I understand. I know, Marcus said. I read the forums. Something shifted in the Lord Sovereign's expression. She told me, Drevath said, that the solution to the relay station required understanding how systems that cannot communicate can coexist. He paused. She said you would understand what she meant by that. Two incompatible frameworks in productive relationship instead of mutual suppression, Marcus said, maintained by an external feedback loop that continuously adjusts the offset. Drevath was quiet for a long moment. You are very strange, he said, but not critically, more with the neutrality of an observation about the weather. I've been told that, Marcus said. My daughter is also very strange. I've noticed. The Lord Sovereign looked at his daughter again, for a long time, with an expression that Marcus didn't have the cultural vocabulary to fully read, but that Uncle would later describe, when Marcus asked, as something close to relief. House Karath, Drevath said finally, has maintained its position for 3,000 years by knowing when the patterns have run their course. He straightened. The full-court posture of a Lord Sovereign reasserted itself, the 400 years of authority visible in his spine. I will not stand in the way of what the algorithm has decided. A pause. I am not certain I could. You're certain enough not to try, Vraxin said. He looked at her. Yes. The engagement ceremony, because there was one, because the Vreth did not operate without ceremony, even when their most uncommon princess was involved, took place 3 weeks later on a cooperative station in neutral space. Uncle presided, which turned out to be his function. 112 years as a diplomatic counselor, and this was the work he'd actually been built for. the ritual of two people formally declaring that they intended to remain in each other's presence through whatever came next. Vraxen wore House Kareth formal attire, which was deep crimson and structured in ways that reflected 11,000 years of Vreth aesthetic philosophy, every fold a considered choice, every seam a deliberate line. Marcus wore his best suit. It was a very good suit, because Devon had taken him shopping and refused to let him buy anything with a single color tie. Devon was there. He had flown from Columbus to Iceland to a cooperative transport hub, to a neutral station in deep space, to watch his friend get engaged to an alien princess, and he stood in the small ceremony audience with the expression of a man who had helped dare someone into the best decision of his life. Marcus stood across from Vraxen in the ceremony space, and she was looking at him the way she had in the photographs, and the way she had in the Reykjavik Hall, and the way she had 11,000 times in the days between then and now. With the mountain-certain eyes, the layered amber and the vertical pupil fully widened. Uncle's voice came from the room's ceremonial register, slow and deliberate, and carrying the weight of 112 years of watching human beings and all the others navigate toward each other. The Vreth formal binding, he said, requires the declaration of resonance, the acknowledgement that two systems have found their productive frequency. The human formal engagement requires the declaration of intent, the acknowledgement that one person chooses another. He paused. In this case, I will note for the record that both are satisfied. Resonance, Vraxen said, looking at Marcus. Intent, Marcus said, looking at her. She put out her lower left hand. He took it. Her fingers were warm and her third finger folded slightly, not nervously, but as notation, the physical language of someone marking a variable as resolved. He pressed his thumb to the inside of her wrist, where the pulse was, because that's where he always checked when something was running right. It was. Devon, in the audience, put his fist in his mouth to keep from making a sound. He failed. The sound he made was small and mostly happy. Uncle said nothing else. He didn't need to. He had been planning this for 3 months, had made his recommendation to the algorithm, had given Marcus the one piece of information he needed in an orientation session that he had always known would lead here, and the system had done what compatible systems do when the offset is right and the feedback loop is working. It had found its frequency. And somewhere in the relay station in the Relan corridor, between the gravitational pulls of 2 medium stars, the gold-green light of 2 incompatible frameworks in productive relationship continued to burn inelegant, 12% over optimal, and running perfectly.